All right, so when we talked about the 8 characteristics of life, the eighth characteristic, in no particular order, but the last characteristic we talked about was that all living things are made of cells. So we're going to at least introduce you to today the concept of cells. Um, Cells, in the grand scheme of things, are not to say they're a new discovery, but they weren't discovered until the 1600s, which is the advent of the microscope. There's two people primarily who were noted for the discovery of cells around the same time. There was in 1665, there was Robert Hooke who noticed cells by looking in cork, and this is actually the picture he drew. To see cork under the microscope, it looks like this. And then there's some belief that he actually coined the term cells because he thought they looked like the cells of a prison, kind of stacked upon one another, like the different stories that of which would be in prison. And then around the same time, there was Anton von Leeuwenhoek, who noticed in drops of pond water tiny little organisms. And this is an experiment you may have done back in fourth grade, fifth grade, when you put a drop of water and you see little swimming organisms. There was a belief at the time they were animals and such, not quite the case, but they are living things. And it really opened our eyes back then to the fact that life is very much small as it is visible to the eye. So there is what we consider the cell theory, which is pretty set in stone and likewise pretty well accepted. And one of these parts ultimately keeps it being theoretical. And we'll get to that in a second. But life, as far as we know it, all organisms are made of cells. Everything we've discovered, whether it be plant, animal, fungus, bacteria, all living things we've ever to discover, and likewise, as far as we understand, are made of cells. Cells are the basic unit, structure, and function in life. And what that basically means, as we've noted before, is that cells display all of those characteristics of life. They are based on the genetic code. They have changed over time. They've evolved. They need materials for energy. They grow and develop, and so on and so forth. The last part, which is technically the part that really makes it a theory, is that all cells come from pre-existing cells, which makes sense. You know, all of our cells come from pre-existing cells. When we grow and when we heal, it's based on the cells we already have. And our cells were at one time came from our parents' cells, so there's that concept of lineage there. But the question, is where do the first cells come from? And there's a lot of debate as to where those first cells came from. And until we know for sure, technically, it's well accepted, but the question that still remains: where do the first cells come from? Do they come from matter and non-living sources, or do they come from some kind of foreign alien life and then bringing life to the earth? Those are the two biggest questions, two biggest theories so far. So to technically be a cell, really all you need is a membrane, a lipid membrane, and DNA. So when you look in this picture here, that is the lipid membrane made of fats and lipids, and the DNA would be generally in the center. But beyond that, we categorize cells into two groups, really. Are they a prokaryote or a eukaryote? Eukaryotes, spelled as such, or eukaryotic cells, really meet these characteristics. First of all, their DNA is enclosed within a nucleus. So the cell we see here has a visible nucleus. And any cell you see under a microscope with a dark spot, for instance, is most likely a eukaryotic cell with a nucleus. They also contain organelles, these specialized cell parts that have their own special little functions. Things you perhaps have heard of, like the mitochondria, lysosomes maybe, ribosomes, things we're going to be talking about. In the world of cells, they are larger. Not to say they're large, but under a microscope, they are much larger than the prokaryotes. They're far more complex because they contain the organelles and other cell parts. That makes them a lot more complex. And they're found in these select organisms, plants and animals. So as much as we like to believe plant and animal cells are different, they're actually both part of the eukaryotic cell type. Fungi and protists. Protists, we mentioned earlier, those types of small, microscopic living organisms that you can find, for instance, in pond water and other types of water. And then the prokaryotic cells, or if you will, prokaryotes, everything is different. They have DNA, but it's not in a nucleus. It's just kind of floating around inside of the cell. It's what we see with those little brown spots. They're much smaller in size, albeit the picture I showed you before and this one are not by no means drawn to scale. But the prokaryotes are much, much smaller than eukaryotes, under a microscope especially. They're far less complex. They don't have organelles and all those other specialized cell parts. They have far less to them. And as far as where you find them in bacteria only. So the question really is it bacteria? It's a prokaryote. Is it a bacteria? No. Then it's a eukaryote. It really comes down to that. Believe it or not, prokaryotes are the most numerous cell type on Earth, but because they're so small and so microscopic, so single-celled, it may not appear so to the naked eye, but they are by all means the most common cell type on Earth.